Greetings, YouTube. So last night at work, I ran what was possibly the most complicated job I've ever done at the company. It wasn't that any one step of the process was complex. It wasn't. It's just that there was a lot of them. 3 to 4 times as many steps as in most of the other types of parts that we run. It just was very poorly designed, and nothing in it really seemed to work all that well. Uh, and it wasn't a lot of fun. And it was the first time I ever ran it. Now, in the past, when I was really significantly lost to anxiety, just coming into work and finding out I was going to be running a part I'd never run before would have set me into a state of anxiety. The pit of my stomach would have just dropped out, and I would have automatically been anxious. But that didn't happen this time. Why? Well, because my anxiety levels are far better controlled now than they used to be, even though last night was the night before the US election, and I had had a headache for 36 consecutive hours because of this election cycle. In fact, at this moment, I don't even know the results yet. So in the past, I would have been really bad off right now, but I'm not right now. I'm all right. I'm doing okay. And I observed myself last night while I was doing this incredibly complex, annoyingly designed, poorly thought out process. It's an older design. We don't make parts this way any longer. And there's a reason for this. And it's just a Mickey Mouse operation from beginning to end. The problem is we only run this part 2 to 3 times a year. No one's going to invest any significant money in improving this. Nobody. So we're just stuck with it. And we'll probably be stuck with it until the company that wants the parts no longer wants the parts. But that could be another decade. We often get parts orders, um, little dribs and drabs, almost forever. Um, so I observed myself trying to keep in check, keep in touch with my own feelings and my own anxiety levels and things, and make sure I was doing okay. And that kind of self awareness, that kind of self care is very important for all of us. But particularly if you are a person that suffers from anxiety and depression, being aware of what's going inside your own head and your own emotional state is very important for you to know when you have to do something, when you have to sometimes just walk away from something. But I noticed that I was focusing my attention on the task at hand. Because again, an annoyingly complex process, each little step had to be paid attention to, but none of the individual steps themselves were all that complex. It's just that there was a long string of them. And I was able to pay attention. And I noticed because the anxiety isn't kind of locking up my brain, that there's a distinct difference between attention and anxiety. Attention is fine. You could be attentive and not be anxious. Now, it is possible if you became uh, hypervigilant, that's not healthy. And I spent decades of my life hypervigilant, so I know exactly what that looks like, what that feels like. Um, there's a difference between hypervigilance and attentive. And I wouldn't have been able to tell that difference if it hadn't been for the work I did with my therapist, Stephen. Uh, so it was a long night, don't get me wrong, at the end of the shift. Because it was a process I'd never worked before, numerous muscles I had were hurting in a way that I hadn't hurt before. So it wasn't a pleasant night. It wasn't a pleasant end of my shift. Um, it wasn't pleasant that I spent almost an hour trying to vote. And by the time I got home, I was tired and I was hungry, but I wasn't anxious, and that's important. Even though I found this election cycle depressing, even though it has my stress levels are higher right now than they have been for a while, all because of the election. Um, it hasn't tipped the balance into full blown anxiety. Now, an interesting thing someone said the other day, they were discussing the life work balance. And my therapist, Stephen, once said, made a very good, very cogent point to me. He said, when it comes to trying to find a balance in life, says, don't think of balance. Because balance is just that. It's if you're perfectly level, okay, cool, you're perfectly level. But if something goes bad, suddenly things are very bad. A better way of looking at this is having an excess of joy in your life. Yes, it's kind of an oxymoron, having too much joy, but the idea being is if you have an excess of joy, when your joy level comes down because of external things that are beyond your control, or because your own internal landscape of mental illness, or just non-mental illness, but that has you, we all enter depressive cycles. If your joy comes down, you still have a surplus of joy. Before you get below that into depression, you have that surplus you built up. And that surplus of joy is going to be different for every single person. It can be your family, your friends, your loved ones, it can be your hobbies, it can be your favorite books. I spend inordinate amount of hours sitting at my computer, poking around the internet and listening to people on YouTube. Mostly listening. I actually don't watch a lot of videos unless they're technical. A lot of the time I'm just listening. So a lot of people I'm subscribed to are talking heads. And so I'm listening to people. And this whole process has this constant stream of information into my skull. Makes me happy. I enjoy it. And that creates the surplus of happiness for me. Also, tackling my PTSD, my depression, and my anxiety helped me get to a place where I could have an excess of joy. So this whole thing is wrapped up together. There's no separation. But I really think thinking of it as a balance is not good. I have to agree with Stephen on that one. Think of it as putting joy in the bank. And yeah, you can pay out of the bank, but as long as you have that excess, you're not putting yourself into debt. Because when you get into debt when it comes to emotions and mental illness, that's bad. That's when depression hits. And all of us can be pushed down. All of us can. Where the healthiest person in the world could have tragedies happen that are well beyond our control. From the death of a pet, to the illness of a family member, to the horrible, nightmarish concept of Donald Trump winning. All of us can experience traumatic, emotional, and mental events that can push down our joy surplus. But we can survive. We can overcome these situations if we prepare. And we prepare by having lots of joy in our life. So there you go. I'm rambling here. Started talking about attention and anxiety, and now I'm talking about joy. Not necessarily a bad way to end video.